The rain drummed against my windshield as I sat in my car across the street, watching through the warm glow of what used to be my family home. Inside, I could see silhouettes moving past the windows. My relatives, laughing, sharing stories, celebrating another Thanksgiving without me. They had no idea that in exactly 48 hours, they'd all be homeless. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how a lifetime of being the family outcast led me to the most satisfying revenge I've ever executed. But to understand why I'm sitting here in the November rain, clutching house keys that will soon belong to strangers, you need to know how it all started. 3 months ago, I received a text from my sister Jennifer. Not a call, mind you. Just a cold, impersonal text. Sarah, we've decided it's best if you don't come to Thanksgiving this year. The family feels it would be too uncomfortable, given everything that's happened. Hope you understand. Everything that's happened. As if standing up to our father's decades of emotional manipulation and calling out the family's toxic dynamics was some unforgivable sin. As if finally having the courage to speak my truth made me the villain in their carefully constructed narrative. I stared at that message for 20 minutes, sitting in my small apartment that I could barely afford, while they planned to gather in the sprawling family home that had been in our name for generations. The same house where I'd spent countless holidays feeling invisible, where my achievements were minimized and my voice was constantly silenced. But here's what they didn't know, what none of them bothered to ask about during their 5-year campaign to freeze me out. I had become the sole heir to that house. Grandma Ruth, the only person who ever truly understood me, had quietly changed her will 2 years before she passed. While they were busy ostracizing me, she witnessed their cruelty and made a decision that would change everything. The house was mine. Legally, completely, unequivocally mine. And I was about to make that very clear. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the sold sign I'd planted in the front yard just hours ago. Inside, Uncle Bob was probably telling his racist jokes while Aunt Linda complained about her ungrateful children. Gad was likely holding court from his recliner, dispensing wisdom nobody asked for, while Mom enabled every toxic word that came out of his mouth. They thought they could erase me from the family story. Tonight, they'd learn that some stories have plot twists nobody sees coming. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages I'd been saving for weeks. Screenshots of family group chats where they mocked my career choices, laughed about my failed relationships, and made jokes about my mental health struggles. Messages I wasn't supposed to see forwarded to me by my teenage cousin Marcus, the only family member who still had a conscience. "Aunt Sarah," he'd texted me last month, "you need to see what they're saying about you. It's not right." The kid was barely 18, but he had more integrity than the rest of them combined. The plan had been forming in my mind for weeks, but seeing them all gathered in my house, eating off my grandmother's china, using my inheritance to fund their holiday celebration, it crystallized everything. They wanted me gone? Fine, but they were going with me. I had already signed the paperwork that morning. The house would be sold to the Henderson family, lovely people who'd been looking for their dream home for months. The closing was scheduled for Monday morning, which gave my family exactly 48 hours to find somewhere else to celebrate their precious holiday. My phone buzzed. A message from Jennifer. Having such a wonderful time. Wish you were here. Followed by a family photo next to the fireplace. 23 people smiling for the camera, making a deliberate show of their happiness without me. I screenshotted it. Evidence of their final celebration in the house that was never really theirs. The rain was getting heavier now, matching the storm I was about to unleash. I'd spent years being the bigger person, swallowing their insults, accepting their exclusion, hoping that someday they'd remember I was family too. But Grandma Ruth had seen what I was too kind to acknowledge. They were never going to change. Sarah, she told me during one of our last conversations, you don't owe anybody your peace of mind. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. She'd squeezed my hand with those frail fingers, her eyes still sharp despite her declining health. This family has forgotten that love isn't just blood. It's how you treat people. I started the car and drove to the all-night copy center. The eviction notices needed to be printed and prepared for delivery first thing tomorrow morning. Legally, I was required to give them 30 days' notice, but there was a clause in my grandmother's will that they'd never bothered to read. The house came with conditions that every single family member had violated. The will specifically stated that the property was to be a gathering place for family, built on love, respect, and inclusion. Anyone who engaged in deliberate exclusion, emotional abuse, or harassment of other family members could be removed from the premises immediately. Thanks to Marcus's screenshots and the hostile messages I'd been receiving, I had documentation of every violation. At 2 a.m., I sat in that fluorescent-lit copy center, printing page after page of evidence. Text messages, social media posts, even recorded voicemails from my father explaining why I wasn't welcome at family gatherings. Each piece of paper was a testament to years of systematic cruelty disguised as family dynamics. The night clerk, a tired-looking college student named David, kept glancing over at the mountain of papers I was producing. "Everything okay, ma'am?" he asked gently. "Better than it's been in years," I replied, and for the first time in months, I meant it. By 6 a.m., I was parked outside the sheriff's office, waiting for Deputy Martinez to arrive for his morning shift. I'd called ahead and explained the situation. Well, the legal part of it, anyway. He'd agreed to accompany me for the official delivery of the notices, ensuring everything was done by the book. "This is a family matter, Mrs. Mitchell," he'd said over the phone. "Are you sure you want to handle it this way?" "Deputy, I've tried handling it every other way for 34 years. This is the only language they understand." Deputy Martinez pulled up at exactly 7:15, and I follow his patrol car through the familiar streets of Maple Heights. The neighborhood was just waking up. Newspapers being delivered, coffee brewing, dogs being walked. Normal families starting their normal Friday morning, completely unaware that the Mitchell family drama was about to explode. We parked in the driveway of 847 Oak Street. My family home. My house. The place where I'd learned to walk, lost my first tooth, and gradually discovered that blood doesn't guarantee love. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lawn where I used to play before I learned that I was different from them, before I understood that my questions made them uncomfortable and my independence made them angry. Deputy Martinez reviewed the paperwork. 30 days would be standard. But given the documented harassment and the specific terms of the will, immediate removal is justified. He looked up at me seriously. Once I ring that doorbell, there's no going back. You understand that, right? I nodded, my hands steady as I held the manila envelope containing copies for each family member. I understand perfectly. The doorbell rang at 7:47 a.m. I know because I was watching the time on my phone, documenting everything from my own records. The door opened to reveal my brother-in-law Mike, still in his pajamas, coffee mug in hand. His confusion was immediate and obvious. "Sarah? What are you doing here? And why is there a police officer?" His voice carried that familiar tone, the one that suggested I was being dramatic, causing unnecessary trouble, making a scene. "Mike, I need to speak with everyone who's currently staying in this house. Can you gather them in the living room, please?" Behind him, I could hear the sounds of a house full of people. Toilets flushing, showers running, someone making breakfast. The comfortable chaos of a family gathering, about to be shattered by the truth they'd all been ignoring. "Sarah, this is ridiculous. We're trying to have a peaceful holiday here. Can't whatever this is wait until after the weekend?" Deputy Martinez stepped forward. "Sir, this is official business regarding the property. We need everyone who's been staying here to be present for the delivery of these notices." Within 10 minutes, they were all assembled in the living room I'd grown up in. Dad in his ratty recliner, looking annoyed. Mom hovering nervously by the kitchen doorway. Jennifer and her husband claiming the couch like they owned it, while Uncle Bob and Aunt Linda flanked them protectively. The cousins filled the remaining chairs, most of them looking genuinely confused about what was happening. Marcus caught my eye from the corner where he was standing, and I saw something in his expression that looked like pride. He knew. Somehow, that kid had figured out what was coming. "I'm here to inform you all that this house has been sold," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. "The new owners take possession on Monday morning. You have until Sunday evening to remove all personal belongings and vacate the premises." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, predictably, Dad erupted. "What the hell are you talking about? This is our house, our family home. You can't just—" "Actually, I can." I pulled out the will, the deed, and the sales contract. "This house became mine when Grandma Ruth passed away. I am the sole owner, and I have every legal right to sell it," which I did. Yesterday. The explosion was immediate and chaotic. Everyone talking at once, shouting accusations, demanding explanations. Jennifer's voice cut through the noise. "You can't be serious. This is insane. We've been planning this gathering for months, and I've been excluded from this family for years," I replied calmly. "Grandma Ruth left this house to me with specific conditions. She wanted it to be a place where family gathered with love and respect. Since you've made it clear that I'm not family in your eyes, you're no longer welcome in my house." Uncle Bob stood up, his face red with anger. "This is what happens when you give property to someone who's clearly mentally unstable. Ruth must have been confused when she changed that will. No way she meant for this to happen. Actually, she was very clear about her intentions." I pulled out a sealed envelope. I'd been saving for this exact moment. She left me a letter explaining exactly why she made this decision. Would you like me to read it aloud? The room fell silent again. They all knew Grandma Ruth had been sharp as a tack until the day she died. They also knew that she'd witnessed years of their treatment toward me, and she'd never been one to bite her tongue when she saw injustice. I opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, letting the anticipation build. Grandma Ruth's handwriting was still clear and strong, even in her final months. Her words carried the weight of someone who had watched a family destroy itself from the inside out. My dearest Sarah, I began reading aloud. If you're reading this letter to the family, it means they've pushed you too far, and you finally decided to stand up for yourself. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I've watched for years as they treated you like an outsider in your own family, and I won't let that continue after I'm gone. Mom gasped audibly. Dad's face had gone from red to pale. Jennifer was shaking her head repeatedly, as if she could make the words disappear. This house has been in our family for 4 generations, but it was never meant to be a fortress against love. It was meant to be a sanctuary for all family members, a place where everyone belonged. What I've witnessed over the past few years has broken my heart. Sarah, you are the only one who has consistently shown real love, not just to me, but to everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. I paused, looking around the room at the faces of people who had spent years convincing themselves that their cruelty was justified, that somehow I had deserved their treatment. The rest of you have forgotten what family means. You've turned gatherings into opportunities to exclude, holidays into weapons, and love into something conditional based on conformity. That ends now. Sarah, this house is yours not because you're perfect, but because you never stopped trying to love people who had given up on loving you back. Aunt Linda was crying now, though I suspect it was more about losing access to the house than any real remorse. Dad had sunk deeper into his recliner, probably realizing that all his years of manipulation and control were finally catching up with him. There's more, I continued, flipping to the second page. She detailed specific incidents. Thanksgiving 2019, when you deliberately served dinner while I was stuck in traffic, and then told everyone I was too inconsiderate to show up on time. Christmas 2020, when you uninvited me because Dad decided my political opinions were ruining the family atmosphere. Easter 2021, when you planned the entire celebration around dates you knew I couldn't make because of work. She remembered everything, every slight, every exclusion, every time you made me feel like I was the problem for wanting to be treated like I mattered. Marcus stepped forward from his corner, his young voice cutting through the tension. Grandma Ruth used to tell me about how you guys treated Aunt Sarah. She said it wasn't right, that families were supposed to protect each other, not tear each other down. I thought adults were supposed to know better. His words hung in the air like an indictment from the next generation, a reminder that children were watching and learning from the example these adults had been setting. Jennifer finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Sarah, we can talk about this. We can work something out. This house has so much history, so many memories. Whose memories, Jennifer? I asked, my patience finally wearing thin. Because most of my memories in this house involve feeling like I didn't belong here. You want to talk about history? Let's talk about the history of family meetings held specifically to discuss the Sarah problem. Let's talk about I spent years begging to be included, trying to understand what I had done wrong, wondering why I wasn't good enough to be part of my own family. The answer was simple. I was never the problem. You were. Deputy Martinez cleared his throat gently. Mrs. Mitchell, do you want to proceed with the formal delivery of the notices? I nodded, pulling out individual envelopes for each adult family member. These contain your official eviction notices, along with documentation of the lease violations and harassment that justify immediate removal. You have until 6 p.m. Sunday to collect your personal belongings. The utilities will be disconnected Monday morning. The reality was finally sinking in for all of them. This wasn't a dramatic gesture or an empty threat. This was actually happening. They were okay. Dad finally spoke, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Sarah, honey, I know we haven't always, families have disagreements. That's normal. But this is extreme. Don't you think you're overreacting? The word overreacting hung in the air like a match dropped in gasoline. After years of being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much, hearing that word in this moment crystallized everything I needed to say. Dad, you want to know what overreacting looks like? Overreacting would have been responding to your decades of emotional manipulation with the same energy you brought to me. Overreacting would have been making you all feel as small and unwanted as you made me feel for most of my adult life. I stood there in the living room where I'd learned to walk, watching the faces of people who had shaped my childhood and then systematically dismantled my sense of belonging. The morning light, streaming through the windows, seemed different now, cleaner somehow, as if even the house itself was ready for a fresh start. This isn't overreacting, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. This is consequence. This is what happens when you mistake someone's patience for weakness, when you confuse their love with submission. I gave you chance after chance to remember that I was family too. Instead, you doubled down on cruelty. Mom stepped forward hesitantly, her hands wringing the kitchen towel she'd been holding. Sarah, sweetie, I know things got complicated, but we're still family. Family forgives. Family works things out. This house has been our gathering place for so long, it feels impossible to imagine holidays anywhere else. Family forgives, I repeated slowly, tasting the familiar manipulation. Mom, I'd spent years forgiving. I forgave when you forgot to invite me to Jennifer's baby shower. I forgave when you moved Dad's birthday dinner to a date I couldn't make, then acted like it was my fault for being difficult about work scheduling. I forgave when you all decided my struggles with depression were too uncomfortable to acknowledge, so you just pretended they didn't exist. The kitchen towel in her hands was getting twisted tighter and tighter as I spoke. I could see the recognition in her eyes, the slow realization that all those little moments she'd dismissed as no big deal had been building toward this moment. But here's when I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a text thread I'd screenshotted weeks ago. But I don't have to tolerate it anymore. Jennifer, would you like to read this message you sent to the family group chat last month? Jennifer's face went white as I held up my phone, displaying her message. Honestly, Thanksgiving is going to be so much more relaxing without Sarah there. No political arguments, no uncomfortable questions about why we do things the way we do. Just normal family time. Normal family time, I read aloud. 18 family members thought that message was worth a thumbs-up reaction. 18 people who were relieved that I wouldn't be there to make them examine their own behavior. Uncle Bob crossed his arms defensively. Sarah, you have to understand. You do have a way of stirring things up. Always asking questions. Always challenging the way we've always done things. Sometimes people just want to relax with their family without having to defend every tradition or opinion. And there it is, I said, looking around the room at faces that were finally showing something resembling honesty. The real reason I was excluded, not because I was disruptive or dramatic or difficult, because I asked questions, because I wanted to understand why we did things that hurt people, because I suggested that maybe, just maybe, some of our traditions changed, needed to evolve. I walked over to the mantelpiece where decades of family photos were displayed. Pictures of birthday parties, graduations, weddings, holiday celebrations. I picked up a recent Thanksgiving photo from 2 years ago, the last one I'd been included in. In the picture, I was standing at the edge of the group, clearly placed there as an afterthought, my smile strained and my body language showing how uncomfortable I felt. Look at this photo, I said. Holding it up, really look at it. Tell me honestly, do I look like someone who belonged in that moment? Or do I look like someone you were tolerating out of obligation? The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, my cousin Rebecca spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, I didn't realize how it looked. I mean, I knew things were tense sometimes, but I thought that was just normal family stuff. I didn't know you felt so left out. Rebecca, yes, you were at the planning meeting where Dad suggested I not be invited this year. You were in the group chat where everyone discussed how to handle the Sarah situation. You knew exactly how left out I felt because you all worked very hard to make sure I felt that way. She looked down at her hands, the shame finally registering on her face. Around the room, I can see similar expressions beginning to emerge. Not quite remorse yet, but at least acknowledgement. Jennifer suddenly stood up, her composure cracking. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, it's easier when you're not here. Everything becomes about you, about your feelings, about your politics, about your need to psychoanalyze every family interaction. We just wanted to have normal gatherings without walking on eggshells. Without walking on eggshells, I repeated thoughtfully. Jennifer, can you give me one example of a time when I made you walk on eggshells? One specific instance where I was unreasonable or demanding. She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling to come up with a concrete example. The room waited, but the specifics he was searching for didn't exist because they never had. The walking on eggshells she was describing was simply the discomfort of having someone present who wouldn't pretend that toxic behavior was normal. You can't think of one, can you? I asked gently. Because what you're calling walking on eggshells was actually just being held accountable for treating people with basic respect. What you experienced as me being difficult was actually me refusing to participate in conversations that hurt people, refusing to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, refusing to pretend that exclusion and manipulation were acceptable family dynamics. Deputy Martinez checked his watch and cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, we should probably wrap this up soon. I have other calls to respond to this morning." I nodded, then looked around the room one final time. These people had shaped my understanding of love, family, and belonging for 34 years. They had taught me lessons I was only now beginning to unlearn. Lessons about being too much, wanting too much, caring too much. "I want you all to understand something," I said, my voice calm and clear. "This isn't revenge. Revenge would be petty and vindictive. This is justice. This is what happens when you mistake someone's love for weakness, when you treat kindness like it's infinite and consequence-free." Grandma Ruth saw what I was too close to see for too long. She watched you all systematically push me out of a family I was born into, and she made sure I'd never have to beg for belonging again. This house is mine now, and for the first time in my life, I'm creating a space where love isn't conditional, where questions are welcomed, where people don't have to earn their place at the table. Marcus stepped forward again, his teenage courage impressing me more than anything else in that room. "Aunt Sarah, can I still visit you? I mean, after all this?" The question pierced through all the adult drama and politics, reminding me why I was really doing this. Not just to punish the adults who had failed me, but to show the next generation that they didn't have to accept toxic dynamics as normal family behavior. "Marcus, you'll always be welcome wherever I am," I said firmly. "You're the only one in this room who had the courage to show me what was being said behind my back. You're the only one who remembered that family means protecting each other, not participating in each other's destruction." I turned back to the assembled group, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. Not as the intimidating authority figures of my childhood. Not as the gatekeepers of family approval I'd spent decades trying to please. But as flawed people who had made consistent choices that led to this moment. "You have 48 hours. I said simply. Use that time wisely. Think about the kind of family you want to be going forward. Because after Monday, you'll have to figure out how to gather without using someone else's house as your foundation." I walked toward the door, Deputy Martinez following behind me. As my hand touched the doorknob of the house I'd grown up in, I heard Dad's voice one last time. "Sarah, wait. Don't leave like this. We can talk about this. We can figure something out." I paused, my hand still on the doorknob, and turned back to face him. For a moment, I saw not the intimidating patriarch who had controlled family dynamics for decades, but an older man who was finally realizing that his actions had consequences he couldn't manipulate his way out. I paused, my hand still on the doorknob, and turned back to face him. For a moment, I saw not the intimidating patriarch who had controlled family dynamics for decades, but an older man who was finally realizing that his actions had consequences he couldn't manipulate his way out of. "I thought you'd always just be there. Family is supposed to be there for each other, no matter what." The irony wasn't lost on me. "You're right, Dad. Family is supposed to be there for each other. But I was the only one who believed that. I was there for birthdays you didn't invite me to, holidays you planned without me, family crises you didn't think to mention until they were over. I was there, even when you made it clear I wasn't wanted." As I walked down the front steps of 847 Oak Street, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the hollow satisfaction of revenge, but the genuine calm that comes from finally aligning your actions with your values. Behind me, I could hear muffled voices rising in, but I have to say you handled it with more grace than most people would have managed. Thank you, Deputy. I've had a lot of years to prepare for this conversation, even if I didn't know it at the time. What happens now? He asked. I mean, for you. This can't be easy, even if it was necessary. I looked back at the house one more time, watching shadows move past the windows as my family processed what had just happened. Now I get to find out what it feels like to build relationships based on mutual respect instead of obligation. It's going to be interesting. As the first message I actually listened to was from Marcus, sent just minutes after I'd left. Aunt Sarah, I'm proud of you. I know this was hard, but you did the right thing. Can I come visit you next weekend? I want to hear more about what Grandma Ruth used to tell you about family. I smiled, pulling over to respond properly. Of course, Marcus. I'd love to have you visit. We can talk about building the kind of family we both deserve. Oh, the next message was from my old college roommate, Lisa, who had watched me struggle with family dynamics for years. Sarah, I just heard through the grapevine about what happened today. I'm so proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. You've been carrying their dysfunction for too long. If you need anything, I'm here. Then came the ones I expected. Voicemails full of anger, accusations, and desperate attempts at emotional manipulation. Jennifer's voice, shrill with panic. Sarah, you can't do this! What about the mortgage on my house? What about the kids' college funds? We've been counting on inheriting this place for our financial planning. Uncle Bob's message was predictably hostile. This is what happens when you let mental illness go untreated. Your grandmother would be ashamed of what you've become. You're destroying this family out of pure spite. But the one that struck me most was from my mother. Her voice broken and pleading. Sarah, honey, I know we haven't been perfect, but families aren't supposed to end like this. Can't we find a way to work this out? I'm begging you, please don't let this be how our story ends. I sat in my car for a long time, processing that last message. The guilt was immediate and familiar. The trained response of someone who had spent decades prioritizing everyone else's comfort over her own well-being. But underneath the guilt was something stronger. The knowledge that I had finally chosen myself. 3 hours later, I was sitting in my own small apartment, surrounded by the life I'd built independently of my family's approval. My bookshelves full of titles they'd never understand. My walls covered with photos from travels they'd never supported. My kitchen table where I'd spent countless evenings working on projects they'd dismissed as Sarah's phases. For the first time in months, I felt at home in my own space. Not because it was perfect or impressive, but because it was mine. Built by my choices, furnished with my values, decorated with my interests. No one here would tell me I was too much, too political, too questioning. No one here would make me feel like I had to apologize for taking up space. My phone rang, and I was surprised to see it was my cousin Rebecca. The same one who had claimed not to realize how excluded I'd been.